everybody. Welcome back. After a 2-year hiatus, the Barron Investment Conference has returned, and this morning we are live at the Metropolitan Opera House at Lincoln Center. This, in fact, is the 29th annual conference for Barron Capital. It's the firm celebrating its 40th anniversary this year, too. We want to bring in our headliner guest this morning, and that is Ron Barron. He is the chairman and CEO of Barron Capital. And Ron, thank you for having us back here today, and it's good to be back.
It's great to be back. Thank you very much.
The theme this year is anything is possible, and you're pretty much an example of just that.
Yeah, so is Elon, but Elon more. But boy, my career, my life has been pretty amazing. My grandparents would never believe it.
Yeah.
So one thing before we start.
Yes.
Is that I just want to, first of all, Joe, you have a really nice compliment to me before about picking the market bottom. You picked the market bottom, too. You've been talking about, hey, what am I going to wait to invest in? Another 10 or 20%? Market's down 30, all the stocks everywhere. So you got it. That's number one. Number two, you used to tell me that you were afraid to open up your 401k. And then all of a sudden you say on television, recently, I'm buying all the time. I just keep buying. Really, really congratulations to that.
Well, thanks. But let's talk about how you feel the market is headed from here. If this was a generational buying opportunity.
Okay, do one thing before we do that?
Yes, you may.
So about, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks ago, my son Michael Barron and I went to Japan for 2 or 3 days, and then we went to Korea. So we get to Korea on a Friday evening around, Thursday evening, actually, at around 5 o'clock at night. Get to the hotel, and picked up by a big SUV, big black SUV. Get to the hotel, pull into the portico share. Driver runs around, opens up my door. As he opens the door, a black Tesla pulls up alongside of the car. I get out of the SUV. The man in the car jumps out of the car and goes, "Ron Barron, can I have a picture with you?" And Michael says, "Dad, I'm really getting optimistic about this trip. This is Korea. They know you in Korea." That's because of CNBC. Well, so thank you.
We want to thank you for coming on with us all these years and talking so honestly about what you see in the markets. It helps our viewers, too. Let's talk about what you see right now, because, Ron, this is a pretty concerning time for a lot of people. Markets have been down substantially this year. Last month was a good one, but there are a lot of questions about whether that will last or whether that was a one-off, especially given what the Fed's doing right now. I know you take a few steps back from the market, but when you do, what do you see?
Well, the way I think about it is that inflation is always present, always. And everything that's in my life and in everyone's life doubles in price. My whole life, it's 4 or 5% a year. So it's not 2, it's not 10, it's not 8, it's 4 or 5% a year. That means everything doubles in price on average about every 14 or 15 years. So I look back at my parents' house that they bought in 1948, the first one. It was $5,000. $5,000 is now worth $400,000. Steak was, meat was, I think, 67 cents a pound when I was in law school. It's now $11 a pound, except if you go to Lobel's, and then it's $67 a pound. $67 a pound. I couldn't afford to shop there before. I still can't afford to shop there. But across the board, everything, tuition, cars, every single thing you want to buy. So you got to protect yourself somehow, and the way I protect myself is by investing in stocks. The stock market, on average, doubles about every 9 or 10 years. So it doubles every 9 or 10 years. And that's because businesses, on average, double every 9 or 10 years. They grow about 7% a year, 2 or 3% real, 3 or 4% inflation. So every 9 or 10 years, the stock market doubles. And every 15 years, 14 years, everything you buy falls in half. So the stock market's a hedge against that, maintaining buying power. And we try to double your money every 5 or 6 years. And we've been able to do that just by investing in companies instead of going 6 or 7% a year, going 15% a year. So we try to double every 5 or 6. The market doubles every 9 or 10. So the easiest thing to do is just invest in an index fund. You don't have to worry about people like us picking stocks for you. And that's a good thing. And then the market, your money falls in half in value every 15 years. So somehow you got to protect against that. You got to own stuff.
Is this time different? Is there a chance, Joe just mentioned Stan Druckenmiller and what he told Joe at the Delivering Alpha conference, that you could be in for a period where you see 10 years or longer where the stock market really doesn't do anything?
Well, there's nobody more brilliant about the stock market than Stan Druckenmiller, that's for sure. But I've never seen anyone really be consistently able to pick the stock market or the economy ever in my whole life, in my whole career. Never. Anyone. And so I don't try. And all we try to do is find these great companies, competitively advantaged, great people, people we trust, people we like their heart, and invest with them for the long term. Tom Pritzker is my friend, and he's the head of Hyatt Corporation. And he says to me a few weeks ago, he says, you know, Ron, I've been trying to figure out for a long time how you do this. How does this happen? And how do you pick stocks? And then he says, I figured it out. What you do is you try to find people who you really like, who you really admire, who you think are great leaders. You like integrity, you can trust them, and then you invest in, and then you find out a way to invest with them. If you like the person, you figure out some way to invest with them. That's what you do. And I think about that, and that is what we do. We try to find, and it goes back to when I was a kid, and I watched the people who were most successful in Asbury Park. And one guy owned the rides on the boardwalk. You know, and they had platforms, and people go to the boardwalk and they buy the rides, or they play the Cupid dolls. Or they had the umbrella franchise, or or the suntan franchise when I was selling on the beach when I'm a lifeguard. So I see these things, and my whole life it's the people who. My grandfather, we started off as a construction worker, then he was a peddler, then he owned a candy store. He didn't sell the candy store when things weren't going well. He just figured out, I'll put more pink balls in there so that they can bounce the penny on the street. So it's about just being long-term about everything. And the people who've done the best that I've watched have done, just invested for the long term in businesses, and that takes you through the inflation. Oh, one more thing. About a week ago, there was an article in the New York Times over the weekend interviewing 6 or 7 money managers about what they thought. And everyone said, well, we have to wait till inflation peaks and we have to wait till interest rates start going down, except for one guy. That was Lloyd Blankfein. And he says that we're going to get through this. He says in 1963, we were stopping the Cuban Missile Crisis. We were stopping Russian ships in mid-ocean, and they were putting missiles in Cuba. We got through that. They had National Guards shooting kids on campuses. We got through that. So we've had periodically, we had assassinations of political leaders. We got through that. So there's all these things that happen all the time. On the other hand, in entropy, it's this chaos. Whenever we've had it before, we've come through, and the stock market is 800, as we talked before, in 1982. It's now 32,000, 40 times.
Are you putting more money to work right now because you can find more opportunities because prices have come down, or is this a situation where you literally just keep your head down and it's business as usual?
In last November, the end of October, you couldn't find things that were expensive, that were cheap.
They were cheap.
Now you can't find things that are expensive. You can't find anything that's expensive. And so if I had more money to invest, I would invest it. I'm invested.
You're fully invested.
Yeah. And, we get more money, but in chunks. And so as soon as we get it, we invest it. But, I find things everywhere. And that doesn't mean this is the bottom. It just means this is a great time to invest. When you're talking today, you're going to hear Hyatt and Vail, and those are companies in which we invest. And these are companies that are selling. They have, they buy in their stock. They have a couple of % yield. They shrink their capitalization 7 or 8% a year. They're selling at 11 or 12 times. There are benefits from inflation. In the 1970s, when I was investing at the beginning, and there was a lot of inflation at that period of time, I couldn't understand. The stock market kept going down. I couldn't understand it. I said, these businesses in which I'm investing, what they own keeps getting more valuable, and every day the stocks go down. Why is that? And of course it ended. But in the 1970s, even though the stock market was going down, the businesses in which we're investing, so I'm a stockbroker, I'm selling research that I'm doing to hedge funds and mutual funds. And in the 1970s, the ideas that I'm selling, they're making money because the companies that we're investing in, they kept growing through it all. It was Disney and McDonald's and Federal Express and Nike and Mattel and Hyatt. So they kept growing, and Tropicana. And so my clients, I wouldn't have been able to make a living if I was just being a long-term investor in the 1970s. I needed commissions. And so I would get people to buy one stock, and then they'd double or triple, and then they would sell it, and then to buy my next idea. So sell Nike, to buy Hyatt, And what would happen is that I look back after 10 years or 15 years, I said, man, I'm a disaster. Look at all those companies that I recommended selling, and look what happened. I could have been rich. They were up, I recommended they doubled or tripled or, and they're up 30 times, 20 times, 50 times. So that's what happened. That's how I became a long-term investor.
You are an incredibly loyal and long-term investor. And I remember at one point your average holding term was something like 12 years. I don't know what it is right now. But there are points where you have sold out of companies. I think of a few, like you're not in Generac anymore, I don't think. You're not in Under Armour anymore. And these were stocks where you did love the management. You loved the people behind it.
Well, Under Armour, we did very well. We made about, I don't know, 7, 8 times our money. And then I felt that I made a mistake. And the stock fell in half, and we sold it, and we probably ended up making 2 or 3 times our money. But we made a lot more before we sold, by the time I sold. And in the case of Generac, I met Aaron Jagfeld a long time ago, and I got you to buy a generator in your home. I said you would be the great advertisement for Generac. And so this is, we had a house in Westport, a weekend house, and whenever it rained, we had no electricity, just gone. And so now we move out to East Hampton, and I say, this time I'm getting a generator. And so we had a giant generator we put out there. And now all of a sudden this company, Generac, is going public. And I said, boy, everyone should have a Generac. And so and only 1% of the houses did. So I tried to get it in the office, and not everyone in my office, very few actually did, and you did. And then they would go public at $12 or $13 a share. And and I really liked the people who owned it, and I thought this Aaron Jagfeld was amazing. And so we ended up investing. It was like $12 or $13 a share. And then in the next 2 years, we got $11 of return of capital dividend. So instead of having a $12 or $13 cost, we had a $1 cost. And then the business is doing great. Hurricane Sandy comes along, and the stock goes to $50 or $60 a share. And then we go visit, and again, we were visiting regularly, and they were buying some other industrial businesses and some motor businesses. And it didn't have the same kind of feeling it did before, although if I had been true to my idea about staying invested with someone, I would have stayed invested with him. He's a spectacular guy. So I sold. And the stock went to 300, but I kept it on my screen. This is just a reminder. Kept it on my screen. Then recently, because of the COVID play also, it went from 300 to 100.
Yeah.
But still, twice what I paid for it, twice what I sold it for.
Are you still looking at it?
Periodically I do, but I'm also a big investor in a battery company, and which is Tesla.
Right.
And so I always think that the batteries are a challenge to that. On the other hand, you do have to have distributed electricity, and you can't just rely on your utilities. This is what happened in California. So you had the freeze in Texas. That was a big deal for this company. Then you had what was happening in California with the fires. And that was a big deal for Generac. You turn off your electricity. Well, if you don't have electricity, but gas is what powers this, so that works. So I think about it periodically, and Rebecca Ellen, who follows this for us, she says it's great, and I keep thinking I should be thinking and studying it again. But I don't have a surplus of cash right now. If I did have a lot of cash, I'd be thinking about it more.
There may not be. I'm guessing that the person you've bet on the earliest and maybe made the most money on is Elon Musk. Is that the case?
We have made a lot of money with him. And right now we have an investment in Tesla, which is about $4 billion. $1 billion is me, $3 billion for clients. And I sold about $1 billion of stock for clients. I was the last one to purchase. Personally, I don't buy stocks. I only invest in our mutual funds. I'm the biggest investor in our funds. But in this instance, I told our board of directors, I said, I committed, I'm not buying any stock. But what I'd like to do is, I'm not going to buy it personally, but I want to buy it for Barron Capital. And so I'd like to invest $50 million. And I'm not going to sell it until I sell every single share for clients. So we sold 20% for clients. And I said that I didn't want people to think I was crazy. To hear the stock went up, actually did 4 or 5 years, it stayed stable, and then it went up 20 times, just like I said it would. And so I said, everyone was criticizing me. They criticized me for not buying, for buying it initially. Then they criticized me at the end for not selling it. So you shouldn't buy it, and then if you own it, you made all that money, now you should sell it. They didn't tell me to buy it, so I sold it for them, and then we owned.
You sold some to make sure that it wasn't too much of your funds at some point, because it had grown so rapidly. It became. Yes,
it became. Well, it's still in Barron Partners Fund. It's 40% of the fund, and now it's 40%. And in Barron Focused Growth Fund, it's 20%, 22%. So nobody has funds like that. But my cost is so low. It's like in those funds, $13, and stock is $2.30. I think I'm going to make 7 times from here in the next 10 years. I make 1.5 or 2 times in the next 3 years. So I think in 2025, I think it'll be 500 or 600. It's now 228. And then I think that by in 10 years, 8 or 10 years, we ought to be somewhere around $4.5 trillion. Elon says now it's a $700 billion market cap. Elon says he thinks it's going to be bigger than Apple and Saudi Aramco together.
You believe that?
Yes. So I think that it's sort of hard to believe, right?
Yeah.
But in 2030, if he does just simple math, if he does 20 million cars a year, there's 100 million cars a year that are being sold right now. If he does 20 million cars a year then, and they're $50,000 a car, that's $1 trillion of revenues. And he has operating profits of somewhere around 30%. That means $300 billion. If you say it's worth 15 times, that's $4.5 trillion. It's now $700 billion. That's how you get those numbers. But that's not including robots. That's not including autonomous vehicles. That's not including batteries. That's not including robots. He thinks robots are going to be bigger than cars. So there's so many things that are happening in Tesla. One of the remarkable things, how do you keep track of this? I can't keep track of as an analyst. You run these companies. How do you do that?
Okay, let's use this as a tease because I want to come back. We have a lot more to talk about with Elon Musk, your investments with him, and all of the companies he's focused into. We should point out you're also personally and through Barron Funds an investor in Twitter. So we're going to talk about that a little later this morning, too. In fact, guys, we're going to talk with Ron throughout the show this morning, and we have some special guests who are going to be joining us. We'll be hearing from the CEOs of several of the companies in the Barron Capital portfolio, including Iridium Communications. We've also talked to Vail Resorts and Hyatt Hotels. And guys, there's a very special guest coming here later. We usually keep the guest list quiet, but Ron has shared it with us, and we will share it with you about some guests you might want to hear from. We'll tell you about that a little later this morning, too.